Today in my driveway, I have the biggest EV I have driven in quite some time. This is the 2024 Mercedes-Benz e-Sprinter. If you're looking for an electric fleet vehicle for urban deliveries, or if you're looking for an EV for van life conversions, you might want to check out the e-Sprinter. It has one of the biggest battery packs and one of the longest ranges available in a full-size electric van. The e-Sprinter was initially launched as a 2024 model year vehicle, but 2025 is probably the one that you're going to get if you order one today. You'll have the choice of the high roof option like you see here, or a low roof if you have some parking restrictions, which is definitely an issue for this high roof model. You also have the option of more color options from the factory than we find really in any of the competition. If you check out the Ford or the GM EV vans or even their regular vans, you notice they have a pretty limited color palette. Mercedes has quite a number of color options, including some metallic paint options as well. So if you are looking for one of these as an EV conversion, even if you wanted to do that yourself or just a personal cargo van or a corporate cargo van with a little bit of extra style, you do have more options. This is about an $800 optional paint color on this particular model, but because every e-Sprinter is really going to be focused on fleet transport, fleet use, we have a lot of matte black plastic all the way around. This model has the available full LED headlights. You can see it's a top-mounted reflector design with the LED firing downwards and then being reflected out. We also have LED turn signals. Unlike many EVs, Mercedes leaves most of the grille intact from the gasoline version of the Sprinter. So this entire area here is actually open and there's a big radiator behind it. There aren't even any active grille shutters. That's likely because of the more commercial-focused mission of the Sprinter. We also have the charge port right here behind the Mercedes logo, but it doesn't open to the side. It actually opens kind of hinged downward at an odd angle. When I first saw this plugged in and charging, I thought, oh wow, the logo is a little broken there. But nope, that's actually how it's supposed to move. Even though Mercedes fits a rubber seal behind the logo door, we have additional doors for the CCS charge connector and of course the J1772 connector above it. While we're on the subject of fueling, it is interesting that Mercedes keeps the gasoline fuel door right there just behind the driver's door, even in the electric model. How big is the e-Sprinter? Well, as you can see, it is pretty darn big. It's about 280 inches long in this high roof long wheelbase format. If this is too big for you, for 2025 you can now get a short wheelbase low roof model that is more than 40 inches shorter than this. That model's still pretty long at 233 inches approximately, so think extended wheelbase half-ton truck in terms of the size for the short wheelbase version. But obviously this is all about cargo practicality. Over 480 cubic feet of storage space behind these panels. Out back we find full LED taillights, an integrated step right there, swing to the side doors that are full height. That is an important touch because in some high roof vans you'll notice that the doors don't go all the way to the top. They actually stop where the regular height roof would be. The roof height extension is about a foot, so if you want the low roof version, you're not going to be able to just easily step inside if you're 6 feet tall. As you can see, for me, I'd have maybe about half an inch of room. If I was careless, I might end up bumping these hinges, but for most folks, you should be able to climb in and out pretty easily. Now, if you want to open the doors all the way to the side, you can do that. There is a latch mechanism there where I can pull that out and then swing the doors all the way over. They don't go completely flush with the side, of course, because they don't want to dent the van or anything like that, but they do get pretty darn close, and they sort of detent into place. That way they're not going to flop over quite as easily. While we're here, we might as well check out the cargo area. We get over 480 cubic feet of storage space back here, and Mercedes has kindly tossed in a crate so that way we can demonstrate the kind of cargo capacity that we have in the e-Sprinter. I'm a little bit sad about that, of course, because I don't have a pallet jack at the moment, so I can't get this out to go to Home Depot and do something crazy with the van. At any rate, just under 490 cubic feet, actually, I should say, of cargo capacity is a little bit lower than the diesel Sprinter. But if you want more cargo room in your next EV van, you don't have too many options. You're basically looking at something like a bright drop. I love the fact that we have lots of LED lighting all the way around the van. You can see it actually lights up the cargo area really well. We also have all of the same ability to add racks and accessories and mount points to the van that you'd find in the diesel version. Those include floor mounting points, D-rings so you can tie down your cargo, lots of mounting points on the walls. You also have the option of a bulkhead between the driver and passenger compartment there. And of course you can see you can easily strap down large pallets like this. As you might imagine, the diesel Sprinter and the e-Sprinter share a great deal in terms of their structure, the suspension, and of course the body design. They even share which wheels are powered, the rear wheels of course. Although I would love to see what Mercedes could do in the future by adding perhaps a small electric motor under the hood, because I suspect it would fit. We're going to take a look at that in a moment. Under the body we have the choice of two different battery packs for 2025. This model has the bigger battery. It's 113 kilowatt hours. You can also get an 81 kilowatt hour battery pack that's going to drop the range by about 80 or 90 miles or so. Now, on those range figures, Mercedes says 273 miles of range for this model, but that's on the WLTP cycle, which is woefully optimistic. It's also not the same testing cycle, apparently, that Ford and Rivian and BrightDrop are using for their vans. So even though this has a bigger number in terms of range, I'm not sure you could directly compare it to those alternatives. The Ford Transit has the lowest range in this segment, just over 100 miles, but it's probably going to be pretty close, especially to the high roof standard battery pack available in this. The other thing to know is that there are two different motors available. You have a standard output and a high output motor, and the reason I laugh a little bit about high output is that it is a pretty massive increase, about 67 horsepower or so, but that only takes you up to 201 horsepower on the rear axle. I would love to see either a bigger motor at some point in the future or an extra motor up front. I think an extra motor might make more sense. If you are doing your calculations there on your hands, yes, the base motor has an output of under 140 horsepower. That's not really that big of a deal because this is targeted mainly at shoppers that are driving around urban areas, and the torque is really going to be more important. Both motors are going to have 295 pound-feet of torque. And remember, there's no transmission to shift through. The motor is directly connected to the wheels, so you don't have that momentary delay of a 9-speed or a 5-speed automatic or whatever you're going to choose in your next van. Although, this is still one of the slowest EVs that we have ever tested. We're going to get to that in the drive section, of course. Let's go ahead and look under the body. You can see those high voltage cables for the electric motor. The electric motor is positioned right there behind the axle. So yes, we still have a solid axle. It's not an independent suspension, but we then have half shafts that actually connect the motor to the wheel hubs. Mercedes protects everything with a panel covering that electric motor, and then you can see the panel that protects the battery all the way up there towards the front of the vehicle. So what's under the hood? Well, I'm glad you asked. Under here, we of course find all the high voltage circuitry. These connect the charge door to the charger and inverter module there, and then it goes on to the battery pack. We also of course have the air conditioning system and the heater for the vehicle. But as you can see, there is quite a lot of room in here. So I suspect Mercedes could easily adapt a small traction motor to the front if they wanted to. Charge speeds are logically going to depend on the kind of power you have access to. The onboard AC charger is rated at 9.6 kilowatts, which means 12 to 13 hours for a complete charge, assuming the battery was completely dead. You can plug this into a DC fast charger and get up to 115 kilowatts as far as the peak rate goes. Now, some folks are going to be disappointed by the peak AC charging rate, but remember, if you have a fleet of vans like this and you've got 10 or 20 or 50 of them plugged in all at the same time, you probably don't really want your van to be charging any faster than 9.6 kilowatts. Although on the subject of AC charging, I am a little bit surprised about two things. The first one is that Mercedes didn't try to bring us three-phase AC charging to the US because most commercial and industrial locations will have access to three-phase power that could have made charging more efficient. Also, they don't seem to support 277 volt AC charging. The logo inside here just actually goes up to 250 volts. 277 volts is a single phase of three-phase 480 volt power. I have a complete video on that if you want to know more about that. That also really would have reduced costs and improved efficiency for the onboard charging system. Hopefully that will come in the future as more and more car companies adopt the new J3400 standard, but at the moment the future is a little uncertain. I'll go ahead and post a link to that video if you want to nerd out on power topics. As you'd expect out of a full-size van, it's kind of a climb to get up here, so if you're a shorter person, keep that in mind. But Mercedes does give us a nice, healthy-sized step there, and then of course we have a grab handle on the door to help get you into the cab. In here we find pretty comfortable seats. Actually, I find these Mercedes seats some of the most comfortable available in a commercial van. That shouldn't surprise too much, of course, because in Europe, the Mercedes vans are definitely seen as the more premium van for commercial use. We have an extending thigh cushion, even though this seat is entirely manual. So we have a manual tilt mechanism on the seat, manual height adjustment, manual recline, etc. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column, and in this model, the steering column is heated. Keep in mind that there are still vans out there that don't offer tilt telescopic steering columns, and I really can't think of many that offer a manual extending thigh cushion. All right, it's time to take a look around the inside. Because we're in the high roof model, we get some additional storage space up here above the windshield. It's actually a pretty large storage area right there. We have sun visors that flip to the side, but they don't extend. And as you can see, we have a rear view camera right there. Obviously, turns into a mirror, but that mirror is not going to be looking at anything because this model has that bulkhead between the cargo area and the passenger compartment. This is an option. You don't have to get it if you don't want to. We have some storage hooks right up there, quite high off the ground. And as you can see, the front seats don't move quite as far rearward as you might think. We have height adjustable shoulder belts and height adjustable headrests there. This model has vinyl upholstery on the seats. There are a bunch of different upholstery options. We have ratchet style armrests there. You can see the extending thigh cushion and the manual seat adjustment levers right there. Moving over to the doors, lots of hard plastics, of course, to help improve durability, but there is a soft touch armrest, which is a nice touch. We also get heated front seats, which I was not expecting necessarily. Lots of hard plastics going on the dashboard. No actual glove compartment in the typical location. Instead, we get a large stationary bin that's actually quite deep. And then we find lots more storage up on the dashboard and cup holders. For a 2-passenger vehicle, this has 6 cup holders, 2 on each side of the dashboard, so 2 over there, 2 over here on the driver's side as well. And then in the middle, we get air vents. These are actually sort of pointing back up at the driver and front passenger. And even if you're in the heater mode, they're going to give you a bit of fresh air to the face, cool air, I should say. And then under here, we find a bit of storage, also some USB inputs for the system, USB charge-only ports, 12-volt outlet right there. And then we find a touchscreen infotainment system nestled right here in the middle of the dash. It does support wireless Apple CarPlay, which is a nice touch. The software is pretty familiar if you've driven any recent Mercedes model, although the screen is a little bit on the small side. It's not the absolute latest version of MBUX, but it's actually not that old either. We do have factory navigation if that's something that you're interested in, although honestly I think most people are probably going to be using their smartphone integration. We have 2 big air vents on each side. Those rotate around to close. Additional little storage cubby is actually pretty deep on each side of that. Some physical controls for the system, including the all-important backup camera. For a vehicle this size, I would really love to have seen some additional camera views, however. The default camera view is pretty wide. You can narrow it in a little bit, and then you can go even closer for more of a hitch view. And then if I actually put the vehicle in reverse, you will get some guidance lines on the system there. You'll also get some wheel direction lines, but the van is so large, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to tell exactly what's going on based on that camera view. Then we have some direct access buttons to other features like vehicle settings right there, track forward, backward option. It doesn't actually go forward, backward. It pops up the option there where you can do that up there. Down here, we have the single zone automatic climate control, auto mode right there. And actually, I miscounted the cup holders. I'm sorry, there are 8 of them because then there are 4 additional cup holders here, some big ones, some small ones. We have the start-stop button there along with the drive mode selector, lots of option blanks for aftermarket use. And then down here, we find yet more power ports, 115-volt outlet, 12-volt outlet's hard to see there on camera, and then an additional USB outlet. No additional storage space going on there. But you can see that rather interestingly, the floor mats are not symmetrical. I am a little bit surprised by that. They could have just given us the same floor mat design on the driver and front passenger side, and then of course hard plastic flooring back there in the middle. On the driver's side, we find a mostly analog instrument cluster with big dials for the speedometer over there on the left, and then a power gauge over here on the right. Charge, power over there. Now, then there are also some additional LED gauges below. This is max power available from the battery pack, 0 to 100. So as the state of charge goes down, or if the battery gets hot, etc., or if it's really cold, that's going to tick down to show you how much available power you can pull out. Then the actual battery state of charge gauge, that's over there on the bottom side of that speedometer. In the middle of everything, we have a multifunction color LCD. It gives us many of the same readouts that you'll see in other Mercedes models, digital speedometer, things like that there, driver attention, bunch of different options, but the LCD is a little on the small side. Moving out from there, we have a wrapped steering wheel with a very similar design to other Mercedes products, including the touch buttons on the front of the steering wheel. These relate to that multifunction LCD, also the cruise control over there, and then over here we have media functions. We then have regen paddles on the back of the steering wheel. That's a feature that I really like. Interestingly, plus means less regen, minus means more regen. So it's a little bit backwards versus some EVs out there. Then on this side, we have some pretty traditional controls for the headlights, the electric parking brake, and the fog lights, etc. And lastly, on the steering column itself, we have the control for the heated steering wheel. That's definitely going to be an asset in colder weather because it's definitely going to consume less energy to heat the steering wheel than the air in the car. Cargo vans are logically all about cargo, so let's talk about that now. 488 cubic feet of cargo capacity is the biggest in this segment, except for the really big format bright drop van. That gets you up to 615 cubic feet of cargo capacity. Of course, if you don't need all that room, you could get the low roof version of this, and obviously those numbers are going to drop down. But we're talking about the biggest interpretation of these vans at the moment. Payload capacity, 2,624 pounds in here. That's really good compared to most of the competition, although the E-Transit will get you 3,300 pounds of payload capacity, and it's only going to sacrifice 1 cubic foot of storage. That's because the battery pack in the E-Transit is quite a bit smaller. Again, it's only rated for about 100 miles of range. This battery is 70% larger, and that's really where you get the extra range, even though we still have that big high roof format. But logically, it's also where the approximate 700 pounds of payload goes, because the battery is simply heavier. I don't have official payload figures for the small battery version, but you can bet it's probably higher than the one we're looking at here. It appears that the bright drop vans from General Motors come in right around 1,800 pounds of payload. The Rivian is closer to this at 2,734 pounds. Also, its cargo capacity is pretty close to this as well. Mercedes says this is also rated to tow, although I'm not exactly how this would perform if you had 2,000 pounds of payload inside and then some trailer connected to the back, but it is rated to tow up to 4,100 pounds when properly equipped. All right, it's time to get this monster out on the road, and obviously the first thing you're going to notice is just how enormous this is, and that's definitely a consideration if you plan on buying one of these personally, but also if you plan on putting one of these in your fleet, especially if you don't already have extended wheelbase high roof vans. Certainly something to keep in mind if you're comparing this to a regular size Transit and you're just looking to upgrade something along those lines. Now, going a little bit out of order on the rough gravel road that we're on here, I think the suspension does an excellent job of soaking up the bumps. Part of that is because we have relatively high profile 75 series tires on this model. These are of course light truck tires, so they also have a tread pattern that's a bit more suited to the kind of road surface that we're on here, also a bit more suited to soaking up some of the bumps. Then we have the added weight of the battery pack. This certainly doesn't feel like an empty cargo van, and I've driven quite a number of empty cargo vans in my life, strangely enough. That's a story for a different occasion, but I'm relatively familiar with the cargo van category. This is probably also a good place to mention that I find the driver's seat, again, pretty darn comfortable. I wish it had adjustable lumbar support, but that's probably the only thing that I would ask for. If you're concerned about the comfort of your drivers in your fleet, especially if they're driving longer distances or they're spending all day in the seat, these are again some of the most comfortable seats in this particular segment. Now let's get out on the paved road and get to the numbers. 0 to 60 happened eventually. This is actually one of the slowest vehicles that I've ever tested. We're just floored this whole time here, and we have finally gotten up to the speed limit. 0 to 60 happened in 13 seconds even. That is definitely a long time, and keep in mind this is the 201 horsepower model, not the 134 horsepower version, which is going to take even longer to get up to highway speeds. Of course, this wasn't really intended for long distance highway travel or necessarily even, suburban area to suburban area kind of travel in the US. This really is more of an urban focused vehicle. That said, thanks to the nearly 300 pound-feet of torque, it does feel peppier than you might think. From a start, it really has a reasonable amount of get up and go. The problem is, that you don't notice much more get up and go between half throttle and full throttle. There's just not a lot extra going on. Up this hill, you definitely notice that you're basically wide open throttle a lot of the time. It still accelerates, mind you, but you're definitely going to be really digging deeper into that throttle than you might think, especially if you live in a mountainous area and you have a lot of weight in the back. I haven't been able to do much more than put maybe about 1,000 pounds of payload in the rear. We did run to Home Depot and get some concrete bags. Did that just fine. Even back up this hill, it actually didn't really feel like there was a lot of weight in the vehicle, so that's thanks to that huge amount of torque. Stopping the e-Sprinter is also definitely going to take longer than average, especially if you have more weight in the back, of course, but even empty, it took 138 feet to stop from 60 miles an hour back to zero. That's pretty logical because we of course have that big battery pack. I would expect the smaller pack option to stop a little bit shorter, and we have 245 width light truck tires on this model. Keep in mind that you'd find wider tires on some of the competition, but not most of them, because of course efficiency is definitely important, and a lot of vans just don't have as wide a tire as you might think. So it's certainly going to take longer to stop something like this than the average half-ton truck. On the other hand, the battery pack's position in the vehicle means that the weight is nice and low. So it actually doesn't have a lot of body roll, doesn't have a lot of tip and dive when you're driving this out on your favorite winding mountain road like this one. Obviously not when there's construction going on. And you'll notice that it's interestingly also not blown around by the wind quite as much as a lot of high-profile vehicles that I've driven. This certainly feels more sure-footed in windy conditions than the average high-roof van in this segment, something like the regular diesel Sprinter, of course. I don't suspect too many people are going to be buying cargo vans based on their handling capability, but I will say that the general feel of the Sprinter is certainly the best in this segment, bearing in mind that in this segment we're basically talking about big bread vans. As far as cabin noise goes, this does pretty well. Keep in mind, of course, we have this big partition behind me, which certainly quiets the passenger compartment down. And the passenger compartment is practically the size of a shoebox in here, because I can't even tilt the seat back very much. But at 50 miles an hour, I measured 71 decibels in here. So it's about as quiet as the average mainstream crossover. Makes a lot of sense, really, because we don't have an engine making extra noise there. Although we do get a reasonable amount of wind noise, especially at higher speeds. So at 50 miles an hour, it's pretty quiet, but as things get up to 70 or 75 miles an hour, you're certainly going to notice more wind noise in here just because of the profile of the vehicle. Now, when it comes to efficiency and real-world range, obviously your driving style and the terrain are going to have a big impact on that. But over the few days that we've had this and approximately 250 miles, we've been averaging between 1.6 and 1.8 miles per kilowatt hour, depending on whether we were going up this hill or not. Round trip, including the hill, on my daily commute, 1.6 miles per kilowatt hour, which would put this at around 180 miles of real-world range if you were willing to charge the battery all the way full and drain it to all the way empty. More realistically, you should expect maybe about 100 to 150 miles of range out of this, keeping the battery in the appropriate charge window. This kind of battery pack would prefer that you don't charge it to 100% all the time. You should probably be charging it to around 80 to 85% on a regular basis and not really dropping too much below 10%. So keep that general range figure in mind. That's probably good for the average fleet, however. When you take a look at a lot of the fleet statistics out there, I actually used to work for a company that had a relatively large gasoline van fleet in the United States. They didn't generally drive more than a few hundred miles a day, and most of the vans didn't drive more than 100 miles a day. Now, obviously, that does not apply to every type of business or every vehicle even within the same business, so it's entirely possible that some fleets out there may choose to electrify some portion of the fleet, but not all of the fleet, and this would be a good alternative for that, especially if you needed a bit more range than you'll find in an e-Transit or the competition. Now, again, about that range, keep in mind that this was not rated on the same rating scale that Ford uses for the e-Transit. So the base model of this is probably pretty comparable to the e-Transit. This has approximately a 70% larger battery than the e-Transit, and that's why we're getting around that 180 miles of range. But if you get the smaller battery, it's going to be an awful lot closer to the Ford in terms of real-world range figures. Also, if you're driving in an urban environment, you should know that you're probably going to be getting better range than I'm getting. For instance, if you're just driving around the San Francisco Bay Area, which logically you could definitely drive this around, you'd likely be getting way above 1.8 miles per kilowatt hour, probably a little bit closer to 2.1 miles per kilowatt hour because you're not climbing up a hill. And obviously that's going to take a lot of extra power. On the other hand, if you're driving in a major metro area that's really spread out, say Houston or San Antonio or something like that, where you're definitely going to be driving a lot of highway miles, perhaps at higher speeds, then your economy may actually end up lower because aerodynamically, this is a pretty darn big brick. For 2025, the eSprinter starts at $63,545. That gets you the standard output motor, the short wheelbase, and the short roof format. If you want the high output motor, that's an extra approximately $3,400. And you probably want that high output motor if you're going to be driving one of these yourself. If your employees are driving it, honestly, it probably doesn't matter. Unless you live in a mountainous area like I do, then I would get everybody the high output motor. If you want the longer format, taller roof model with the bigger battery pack, that's going to be about $72,000 starting, plus of course the high output motor option on this vehicle. If you get carried away with all of the options that are available, the optional paint colors, the interior accessories, the powered driver's seat, things like that, you're going to end up at around $87,700 approximately. Those prices are actually right in line with most of the competition, and the new lower price tag with that short roof, small battery model puts this an awful lot closer to the e-Transit. The e-Transit from Ford is definitely the least expensive entry here at $45,995 starting. But keep in mind, it has a very, very small battery pack. Again, this battery is 70% larger, and even the small battery available in the eSprinter is notably bigger than the battery that we find in the e-Transit. That really is designed for just intra-urban kind of transport. I see an awful lot of those e-Transit vans in my area at supercharger stations, or DC fast charger stations I should say, topping up because it definitely seems to be needed in those vans. With this bigger battery pack, it's much less likely in that same urban cycle that you would need to DC charge at night. And that would mean definitely lower operating costs for a larger fleet of vehicles, depending on how much you pay for electricity. I will say that here in California, my commercial rate for electricity at my office in San Jose is quite pricey. It ends up at around 40 cents per kilowatt hour after all the taxes and fees, etc., have been applied. So for me, it would be kind of a hard sell to actually justify a van like this over the diesel van simply based on costs. You would need to want the lower operating costs of the van when it comes to the maintenance and the repairs in the future, etc. This should be less expensive to keep around than the diesel engine. And then of course you'd have to hope that your electricity prices didn't get crazy out of control. Of course, if you live in a lot of the US, this is not a problem because your electricity is an awful lot cheaper than ours. Now, if you want to get the competition, the Bright Drop, which I think definitely looks cool and modern and funky, is $74,900. That is a General Motors product. It's not a startup, so you don't have to worry too much about its future as far as service and repairs, etc. But GM didn't want to call it a Chevy van for whatever reason. Then we have the Rivian van that definitely also has a very modern look as opposed to this. That's expensive. It's $86,325, and pricing details seem to be hard to find on that model. But the e-Transit, that's really, really inexpensive. However, you don't get as much standard feature content on the e-Transit, and comparably equipped to approximately the base version of this, it's going to be about $64,000 versus about $72,000 for this particular roof format combo, etc. So it's still going to be more expensive to get the Mercedes, but it's not quite as big of a difference as you might otherwise assume. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below, and would you love to see a factory RV conversion, something along those lines, or just more of a consumer model from Mercedes in the eSprinter? I honestly think I would love to see something like that, because this could make a really interesting short-range overlanding vehicle if they added an electric motor up front, gave us just a little bit more oomph. I know a lot of people that don't really take their RVs very far out. And remember, if you go from RV park to RV park, as long as they're not more than about 150 or 200 miles away, you just plug it back in at the RV park and you can charge your battery there as well. So that could be a really interesting twist in this segment. Let me know what you think about that, and of course check out the related content on the channel as well. See all of you next week.